Hello everyone, thanks for coming along today. Hello, my name's Jock Basutil, and I'm going to be talking to you today about some of the experiences I had in government. So this is all about product in government, and hopefully this will be of interest to you whether you're working in government or indeed working in the private sector as well. So hopefully we'll get some good things out of this. So where to start? I think you need a bit of context. So first of all, I was in working in government in between 2014 and 2016, and I had two different roles. One was as head of product for the Ministry of Justice, the digital team there, and then the second one was for the government digital service, where I was head of the product community there. Now, so obviously it's a little while ago, and things have moved on from there, but I did want to kind of share what I'd learned from my time there, because it was quite an interesting time. And to put this in kind of context of when these digital services kind of existed, so GDS, Government Digital Service, was the central digital service, and that started up in about 2011 and was attached to the Cabinet Office in the UK. So it's quite a central government department. And what they did was they defined a template that other independent ministries and departments across the UK government were expected to follow. Now, early on, because they had some pretty good support, they had a lot of political clout, so they could push through change, and they capitalised on this. They got a lot done. They got a lot changed. But later on, their authority had to come less from do as I say, and more from follow our example. So each government department was independent, and so when GDS was setting the template, it was up to the departments and ministries to decide whether and how to follow that template. And the Ministry of Justice, which is actually where I started out, was one of a relatively small handful of departments that followed GDS's lead from the outset. So we're seeing things only a couple, 2 to 3 years after the whole move towards digital services kind of started off. Now, my journey started with a tweet, as some things tend to. And after a couple of months and a lot of security vetting later, I ended up at the Ministry of Justice. And this brutalistic concrete building is down in Petty, France, near St. James's Park. And the Ministry of Justice, as you might expect, is responsible for things like prisons, courts, and it had a Ministry of Justice digital team. And so when I joined MOJ Digital, they'd been running for a couple of years. They'd committed to deliver 4 of GDS's 25 exemplar services. So these were kind of high-profile services that they wanted to launch to demonstrate almost a proof of concept of a more digital government. And they promised to deliver these by March 2015, so about 6 to 9 months after I was joining. So one of the things that GDS and MOJ to an extent have been particularly good at over the years is telling their story. Now, you'll probably remember, if you've been to a conference, a product management conference, any time between in the last 8 years or so, you'll probably I've seen at least some kind of presentation from GDS, and you'll probably remember the high production values of their videos that you tended to see. And whilst these did accurately represent their focus on user needs and the things they did well, by choice and by necessity, I think they had to gloss over some of the challenges, shall we say, of the day-to-day life in the various digital teams. Politics, as you can expect, always played a major part. And GDS, because it started out as a disruptor, they ruffled feathers. They alienated some big departments, and they did talk about sometimes the things that didn't go so well, but there was always a worry in the background that if they made too much of a deal about some of the stuff that didn't work so well, then it might end up on the front page of the Daily Mail, one of the tabloids here in the UK. So you can understand why they wanted to minimise the politics. If every mistake you make as a product manager or as a working in your company is potentially going to be front page news the next day, then you really don't want to do that. And particularly in sort of precarious position they were in, where they needed to make sure that the approach actually worked, and they didn't want to undermine that. They were understandably quite conscious of their image and what was going on. So what I'm just trying to say is that I want to give kind of a little bit of a behind the scenes thing, because funnily enough, not everything plays out perfectly, and not everything is necessarily as easy as it may look, and that's kind of important to realise. So, at the time I joined, product management and many other disciplines like design and user research were very new to the civil service. So generally these disciplines had to be recruited in especially or homegrown. And recruiting people into the civil service would take about 6 months, whereas in comparison, recruiting contractors or freelancers would take 2 to 3 months. So to get things moving, that's the approach that GDS and MOJ took. They got lots of contractors in. Now, the freelancers on my team were talented and lovely, but they were a lot more expensive than civil servants. And we're all very conscious of the fact this is paid for by the taxpayer. Another problem was the brain drain. A contractor could walk out the door with minimal notice. They could walk out kind of with days, not even weeks. And when they left, they would take all of the investment of knowledge with them. And there was minimal incentive for them to kind of do any handover unless they were nice people, which, to be fair, quite a lot of them were. So this initial reliance on freelancers meant that civil servants were not getting the chance to learn more about product management. So the goal was to get more civil servant product managers in place who would keep the investment of knowledge within the civil service and, by definition, save the taxpayer a bit of money. And for those of you who may think that I'm potentially being hypocritical in this, yes, I was a freelancer, and I made myself redundant as quickly as possible by recruiting a civil servant to replace me as head of product, both at MOJ and GDS. So that was something I did reasonably quickly. So I'm going to talk about 4 things today in the time we've got. 1 is building a community. 2nd thing, open working. 3, how we kept ourselves honest. And 4, about how we continuously improved ourselves. So one of the ways I wanted to counteract this brain drain was to establish more of a product community. Now at MOJ we had 12 product managers, including a couple of civil servants, but mostly freelancers, and there were differing levels of experience. Each product manager worked with a multidisciplinary delivery team, so product management, user researchers, designers, developers, etc., etc., etc. My team was about twice the size of the one you see in the photo. So these guys were about half of my team. And before I got there, I don't think they'd even sat in a room together. Right? They were so busy that they were just kind of getting on with their products. They didn't necessarily socialise, have time to socialise much with each other. So as a result, there was not really anything resembling a community. It was just a collection of individuals. And this was almost repeated at GDS, a much bigger organisation compared to the Ministry of Justice's digital service. So there are at least, about 40 product managers at differing levels from, associate, junior level all the way up to lead or effectively product manager, head of product management. And I don't think they necessarily knew about each other's existence. So while I was at GDS in particular, I was trying to dig out where all these product managers were hiding. And I'd probably say there's about 400 of them across central government alone. And again, there wasn't really any community to speak of. So my focus really at both MOJ and GDS was to try and get this product community acting like a product community. One of the reasons for this is some research I read a while back by Professor Alex Pentland. He's at MIT, and he researches how people decide to change their behaviour. And what he discovered was that it's very difficult to give an incentive or influence people to change their behaviour or habits. And that's why people don't quit smoking even when all the evidence is showing them or even they're paid to do so. As soon as the incentive goes away, the effect wears off. But what he did see was that people did change their behaviours when they saw their peers getting a good outcome from a particular approach, because then they were far more likely to copy that approach because they thought they could get a benefit for themselves. So part of the reason for establishing a product community was to encourage more peer learning, because when you see somebody getting a benefit from a particular approach they're taking in product management, my hope was that other people would want to emulate that and share that behavior, which means that we kind of have less of a concern if people leave the organization. So I started small, and I got a weekly get-together in the diary for product managers to attend. And it was fixed in time, relatively short, and attendance was optional. Essentially what I wanted to do was not to kind of force people into this, but what I wanted them is to want to come along to this. But also I recognised that, people had routines and schedules already set up. So gradually over time, people would start to avoid scheduling other meetings over the time slot we had for our weekly get-together. But it wasn't a problem, if they just absolutely had to meet with a stakeholder or something at the same time, these things happen. So relaxed, but a fixed time in the diary. And we needed to have psychological safety, because it was absolutely crucial that our get-together was a safe space for the product managers to be able to talk openly about what they were doing, the mistakes they were making potentially, the challenges they were facing. And so it was very important for that to be a closed space to begin with, and to make sure that people were comfortable talking about this stuff in front of each other. The next thing we did was to put a bit of time boxing around this. I didn't really want the session to become some kind of cathartic therapy session where people turn up and just want to have a massive moan about something or vent about whatever is annoying them that week. Because to be honest, my one-to-one coaching sessions with the product managers were the place for that. So what we do is we give each product manager in a team 3 minutes, and they'd have to cover 3 questions. And it was kind of like a sitting down stand-up, if you like. And I'd actually set a timer to keep things moving. So if all 12 of the product managers turned up plus me, we were really looking at kind of at least 45 minutes for this. So there was a reason to keep it brief. And of course, I always expected people to have a quick chat afterwards if there's anything they wanted to follow up afterwards. And so this became quite an efficient way to share experience. Now, the way we structured this was 3 questions. What have I learned that's worth sharing? What's the next big thing coming up for me? So a bit of almost situational awareness for the team. And I've got a problem. Can anyone help me with this? Now, a few more interesting challenges we had to deal with at the time. So, culture clash, always fun and games. Now, whenever you're disrupting or introducing a new way of doing things, there's going to be some kind of culture clash with the prevailing culture at the time. And as you can kind of imagine, things were very different. There's a very different way of organising things in the civil service. It was very much a top-down approach. And the minister would announce some kind of policy, which would largely come as a surprise to the civil servants who then had to somehow make it happen. And I fully appreciate the irony of talking about that, given what's going on right now. But let's let's keep that to one side. And so it's not surprising, given that IT was seen not as a core competency of the civil service at the time, that whenever something came up that needed some kind of system, it was almost immediately outsourced to one of the big providers, rather than attempting to deal with it in-house. And these big IT providers would promise a certain solution, a certain timescale for a certain price that met the budget constraints. That would get them selected. But as soon as they were selected, then suddenly all of these budget timescales, cost and scope would go out the window, and the thing would end up costing 10 times the price and take 10 times as long. So we were working kind of to change that way of thinking, because actually with the right skills in-house, things could be done much more effectively and actually a lot more cheaply at the same time. So this was exactly the kind of problem we were trying to set out to solve, but it was very embedded and it was very tricky to get things to change. Culturally, there was a fear of delegating decision-making to the product teams. It just went against this top-down approach, this kind of command and control approach that was in place. So the idea of empowering delivery teams of comparatively junior civil servants to take their own decisions based on their own research was disconcerting and difficult for the more senior civil servants. And it didn't help that, agile working was seen as a fad or an experiment, that was being carried out by, in inverted commas, kids wearing jeans. And there was very much a thought that this would, fall out of fashion and the experiment would fail. So bearing in mind that the UK government invented Prince 2, and so existing program management and project management offices were in a position of control and power, and funnily enough, they wanted to keep hold of that control. So it's not surprising that subsequently, Agile as a concept was kind of hijacked and its meaning was twisted, so that essentially all of these program management processes could stay in place under the auspices or under the banner of being agile, and hence why you've got these abominations such as SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework for Enterprise, and things like that. But anyway, needless to say, a tricky culture to kind of work with. So the way we kind of wanted to win over the skeptics was through open working. So this meant making stuff as visible as possible, being absolutely transparent in the way we worked. And sometimes it meant explaining how things worked. And so this is a post that was up in GDS. It was by Lisa Reichelt, who at the time was the head of user research there at GDS. And what she's doing in this particular poster is explaining, for the benefit of possibly some of the actual delivery teams, but maybe just anyone else who happened to be passing by, what user research and design do at different stages of the process. Another way of being open and transparent was doing stand-ups, and I'm sure that many of you are absolutely familiar with these. But it tended to be in front of a physical board that was always there, could always be seen, and that anyone could read if they walked past. So again, it was trying to encourage this idea that people weren't being private or being secretive about the kind of things they were working on. All the working we were doing was in the open. So things like putting user research findings, user personas, user stories on the walls. So again, other teams could see what they're working on potentially. Oh, that's interesting. We're doing something a bit like that as well. Can you tell us how you're getting around this particular problem? And it's all about that kind of starting the conversation, getting the opportunities for peer-to-peer learning, and asking questions. And I should hasten to add, this was stuff that the teams were doing quite happily before I turned up. I am not in any way claiming any credit for this working practice. It's just to illustrate kind of what we meant by working in the open. Now, one of the things I did do was to try and get people thinking about roadmaps. So here's a real rough roadmap that I was throwing together, hence why it's got alpha plastered all over it, because it's literally scribbled on bits of paper. And the more eagle-eyed of you will see the now, next, and later that's probably very familiar to you as ProdPad users. And so really what I was trying to do was to get people thinking a bit more strategically and a bit less reactively about the portfolio of digital services we were working on. And so I stuck this right up in the seating area, so where people had their lunches, and right next to the front door, so it would get the maximum number of eyeballs on it. And as I said, it didn't have to look pretty, but what I wanted was to people to start thinking about what are we working on. How do those things fit together as a portfolio? Does it make sense? Is it coherent? Could we be doing things better if we're doing them in a different order, so we can get the shared benefits from what we're doing? So it was very much about getting things up there and getting people talking and seeing things. So another way of keeping things open and transparent was by sitting down with people and working with them in some way or another. One of the ways we'd do that would be to every digital service, every product we created, before it could be sent into or a live operation and be fully signed off, it had to be demonstrated to the minister in charge, or in this case, a lady called Ursula Brennan, who is the permanent secretary at the Ministry of Justice. So in effect, the most senior civil servant there and the boss, if you want to put it that way. So what this meant was that things weren't happening in a way that they'd get kind of pushed out into the world without any oversight. What we're doing is we're deliberately going right to the top of the tree, right to the top of the organization, and saying, look, this is something we're doing, this is what we've done. We want you to see how this is going to work. We want you to see how this is going to affect people's lives. And we want to make sure that there is no hidden or secretive aspect to what we're doing. We're going to be absolutely open and transparent and make sure that everyone is clear on what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that extended to our user research. So here's Kelly helping out with the user research. She's in one of the courts, and what she's doing at the moment is she's getting user research, effectively doing usability tests on what are variations of a paper form. Now, the goal here wasn't to make a better paper form, although the department that was responsible, the bit of the Ministry of Justice that was responsible for it, kind of were in the habit of doing that. It was actually to do away with the form completely. And the only reason we're testing out the paper form is to find out what people understand, what's easy and what's difficult, because only then can we build a digital service to replace it that gets around those particular challenges for the users. And this was one of the easiest, quickest ways to find that out. And when we talked about working with people and sitting down with people to win over the skeptics, here's an example. So there's a lady who wrote a blog article, and she works for the bit of the Ministry of Justice that owns that particular service that Kelly was doing the usability test and the paper forms for. And because they were absolutely skeptical of doing anything digital or agile, they were quite happy just to keep iterating on the paper form as they had done for dozens of years before. But because we got them involved, because we actually sat down with them and showed them a different way of working, they were able to win over skeptics like Maya, who suddenly realized that actually there was a much better way of doing this, and that didn't necessarily translate into a slightly better paper form. And then, of course, the next area that we did to keep things open and transparent was by talking and blogging about what we did. And this is probably some of the stuff that you might have read. I don't think necessarily that the digital services blog as much as they used to, but what they do blog about is still worthwhile. So it's always worth having a look to see what kind of things are going on. I think in particular, the design and user research blogs are particularly good. It may surprise some of you to see that the Ministry of Justice has a page on GitHub. Certainly, it was surprising to me when I joined, actually, that they're literally coding in the open. And as it turns out, pretty much everything created by any government digital team is open sourced by default, partly because it's a condition to go live. But this means that we're trying to capitalize on the benefits of not having to reinvent the wheel every single time. So, because code can be reused, and the idea being is if we've done something generic, other departments should be able to take that code and reuse it and add to it if they need to. And also, because it's essentially paid for by taxpayers, it's also available to taxpayers and indeed anyone else. So all of these repos are open and available on GitHub. And I think when I checked the other week, there's like 63 central government accounts on GitHub, 29 local government accounts, and just the MOJ digital repository or account has got 1,200 repositories of code on there. So if you imagine every single one of those accounts has a similar number or more of those repositories, you can kind of understand how much code there is potentially available to people to use. Now, obviously, some of it's going to be quite specialized, but there's certainly going to be some things in there that's freely available and useful. So that takes us on to keeping honest. Now, I'm just keeping an eye on the time, so I'll move on with this. It's probably a good idea for every organization to have a set of guiding principles for how you create products. We had something called the Digital Service Standard, and essentially this was things like making sure we're meeting user needs, providing good service, and using the right technology. And you'll notice you can see make all source code open, and so on and so forth. Every service had to be assessed before it could go live. And this meant that we'd sit down as a panel and review every service of a particular size and above to make sure that it was going to do what was needed. And these reports themselves were then published and made available on the website, and you can go and see those as well. So the idea being is that we're trying to make sure that not just we're building the right products, but we're building them in the right way, and they're ultimately focused on user needs and will actually solve the desired problem. And then we publish things like KPIs and performance dashboards, but we're measuring 4 particular KPIs: cost per transaction, user satisfaction, completion rate, digital take-up, and that kind of thing. So again, we're trying to make things as open and transparent as possible. And here's an example of one of the dashboards for the vehicle tax service. So when people check to see if the vehicle's taxed, they use this particular service. 150 million people are using it every quarter. And the user satisfaction is 89.5%, which is pretty good going. So the last piece of the puzzle was continuous improvement, about the people as well as how we worked. So one of the things I did was to get people to do a self-assessment about where they were stronger or weaker in both the technical and the soft skills as a product manager. And what this allowed us to do is when we collated the results, we could explore how they were doing against the average for the team, and say, well, okay, you're a bit weaker in these areas. Maybe we can work on these in the one-to-one coaching sessions, or maybe you're a bit more, you're above average in this particular area. So maybe you can share some knowledge with the other product managers, either as a show and tell or that kind of thing. And part of that was doing the show and tells. Lisa Reichelt, again, who has now since gone on to Atlassian, always talked about showing the value of showing what you've done over talking about it. So we had these sessions called Show the Thing. And this is where we'd spend half an hour each week spending 5 to 10 minutes talking about something we'd learned or something we'd done or built. And the emphasis was very much about getting other people to see the benefits of what we'd done and being able to ask questions and that kind of thing. And again, we get 3 or 4 show the things into 30 minutes, so it's relatively quick and time boxed. We also had retrospectives after each set of sprints, as you'd expect, but probably more uniquely, the whole organization, the whole digital service team, so about 150 odd people, would get together and do a retrospective every quarter. And this was about how we as an organization can do better at what we're doing. So, here are the takeaways then. It's taken us about 8 years plus to get to this point where people are no longer questioning the agile or user-centric way of working as being a fad or an experiment. And the only reason that's happened is there's been a lot of hard work by dedicated, motivated people over a long period of time. You know, in the context, I'd been in total in government for maybe one of those 8 years. And culture change, by definition, takes a long time. So while Agile may no longer be seen anymore as a fad, the problem is that its meaning has been hijacked and subverted a bit. So it doesn't make sense anymore to use the term Agile because it now means something completely different. You know, the SAFe diagram you saw earlier is kind of an indication of what people seem to think Agile means these days. It's not about the process, it's about being responsive to feedback and being able to do something with that feedback in your products as quickly as possible. So really, I think if you were in a position where you're trying to get some kind of culture change to happen in your organization, the first place to start is with the people, because it's the people and their continuing effort that are really going to make the change. You need to work as openly as you can do. I'm not saying expose your corporate IP and company secrets to the whole world, but I'm saying work as openly as you can do within your organization. And if you can work openly with your customers as well, then that's going to be even better. I think you need to try and find a way to keep yourselves as honest as possible through peer reviews, through publishing results, by not shying away from the things that you could do better, as long as you are able to demonstrate what you're doing to do them better. And it suddenly becomes a lot harder for people to criticize you if you've already made the point yourself and then explained how you made it better. Always try to find ways to improve yourselves in terms of teaching yourselves, learning from each other, building yourselves up as a community, but also how you can improve the way you're working as an organization. So beyond the product management community into other communities and as an organization as a whole, what can you do to remove some of the roadblocks or impediments that you're seeing, not just within your teams, but as an organization? If hiring is taking a long time, what can you do to speed up the hiring process? If onboarding people is really difficult, what can you do to make that better? And so really focusing in on and doing these retrospectives and then doing experiments off the back of those retrospectives to see if you can improve things is really valuable and important. So culture change is possible, but it takes time. And it's only through tenacious, dedicated people working really hard over a long period of time that you can actually get things to stick and become habitual. But you know what? It is worthwhile, and the results do speak for themselves, hopefully. So that's what I had. Thank you very much for listening, and I will be happy to take any questions.
So her question is the working in the open concept. How would you recommend that continues through COVID?
Oh, okay. So COVID is one of those things I think that has forced everyone to make an even bigger effort than before on communicating. So whether it's keeping up the communications within your team through video calls or whatever else, whatever you're doing before to work remotely or to communicate, you have to do even more of. And I think that goes the same for communicating about what you're doing and working in the open. So fine, you can't all gather in the same place and you can't see the physical boards anymore. What can you do to make the information available digitally and make it as accessible as you can do, virtually? I'm not saying necessarily this is the best way of doing it, but I've seen teams who would literally have a webcam on some of the things they're working on, so you could kind of remind themselves of what people were looking at. Now, obviously, if no one's in the office updating the thing, that doesn't really help. But if you do have things like something on Miro or something on a Trello board or some kind of online collaborative system, then it's never going to be as good, because let's face it, everything that we're having to do remotely and virtually is a compromise from being in person. But I think just finding the best ways we can to over communicate and compensate for this virtual nature, I think is all we can do, and we just have to make the best of it. I don't have any magic solutions for that, but I think everyone's in the same boat, at least on this.
Next question is, which specific methods or tools would you recommend starting with in a company that has a new and small product team?
You know what? I would say to start with, don't worry about the tools or the methodologies, because really what you want to think about most is the mindset you're going into something with. And the reason I say that is not because I don't think there's value in some of these tools and frameworks, but often people get hung up on deploying the tool over thinking about what it is they're trying to achieve. When I had those 12 product managers and their respective delivery teams, they all actually use completely different tools and not necessarily completely different, but generally different methodologies to achieve what they're trying to do. So some would do a variation of Scrum, some would do a variation of Kanban, some people would do a hybrid of the two, some people would do something completely different. The idea being is that you need to look at the circumstances, the context you're in, and decide what tools and what approaches are going to help you solve those specific problems. So that's why I'm kind of loath to recommend anything in particular, because what works in one situation doesn't necessarily work so well in others. But it really boils down to, can you figure out what are the challenges your team is facing, and what are the tools that can be best placed to help you, and what's going to be the methodology that's going to help you most in that situation. So maybe to kind of give you a little bit of an example rather than being a bit evasive and not answering the question properly. If you're doing something that's relatively certain, so you kind of know roughly what you're going to be building and how you're going to be doing it, using something like Scrum is great because you do 2-week sprints and then you can change direction every couple of weeks. But if you're dealing with something that's a bit more uncertain, so you're not really sure what technologies you're going to be using, something like Kanban can help because the time it takes to go through a cycle and therefore to be able to change direction in response to feedback can be as short as a day or less because it's literally the time it takes for an item to get from one side of the board to the other. So depending on, I guess, how uncertain the thing is you're working on will help to dictate to an extent what methodologies, even within the agile world, will be more appropriate or less appropriate to use. And then you can start looking at tools to help you run those particular methodologies more efficiently.
Were the ministers able to provide you with interesting feedback?
Oh, yeah, interesting. Yeah. Was it the feedback we were looking for? Not always. As with anything, we had a real mixture of people. Now, broadly speaking, actually, once you actually got in front of the more senior people, as long as you could show them how that was going to help them enact the policies they wanted to make, then generally they were quite supportive. Now, clearly, when politics started to play a part in this, it became a bit more tricky. But what you have to also remember is that kind of in parallel with what we were doing with the digital teams, there was kind of like a groundswell, of attempts to kind of bring a bit more, I guess, almost like kind of user research and, almost, I dare to say, product management to policy making. So instead of the whole idea of like, the first you hear of a policy is when the minister stands up in the House of Commons and declares that something is going to happen. And we've all seen examples of that recently. Instead, the minister would work with their teams down the organisation to figure out what is the problem we're actually trying to solve, and therefore what should the policy be that we put in place to solve it. But it's very difficult to break with hundreds of years of tradition, or habit at least, if not necessarily. Sometimes, we had like really supportive ministers who would give us great feedback and they could see that this was going to be absolutely useful to what they were trying to achieve and what they were doing for their constituents. But, sometimes people are going, yeah, that's not what I wanted because that's not what I personally would have done. That's not personally how I would have designed it, because they haven't quite got their head around the whole sort of user-centric thinking, the whole way of putting the problem first and then solving that rather than putting the solution first and then retrofitting something and trying to solve it that way. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, really. And as you can see across government, if you just look at the UK, there are good examples and there are bad examples. You tend to hear more of the bad examples because they're the ones that make the headlines.
You mentioned trying to nudge people into coming to community of practice meetups.
Yes.
By presenting benefits. What were the most common benefits that you saw?
Oh, it's really difficult to kind of put my finger on it, but there's a sort of subtle change that happens when people stop acting as individuals and acting as a group of people with a shared goal. And it's kind of a weird one to describe. It's kind of quite subtle, but it's little things like rather than individuals waiting to talk about things with their head of product in one-to-ones, they'd almost take the initiative and just go and talk to someone else in their team. Peers rather than line manager. And whilst that's a subtle shift, it makes a dramatic difference on, first of all, how information gets spread around, but also how quickly sort of individual people's challenges, can be resolved. There's also a sense of we're in this together, which you don't necessarily get to begin with until the community starts forming. And that also, I think, which is something that we've seen over and over again. I mean, just look at the broader product management community that's sprung up over the last 8 or 9 years or so, and just seeing the benefits when suddenly you realize, oh, there's a whole bunch of people who have actually been through this as well. I'm not on my own. I'm not the only one experiencing this problem. I'm not going mad. This is just difficult, and there are certain hacks and ways of getting around this that other people have maybe managed to figure out that they can share with me. So I think that the benefits really I think, start to multiply, and you start to see more of an effect when suddenly, as a head of community or as a head of product or whatever else, when you suddenly realize you're not pushing anymore, you're not kind of putting the effort in to keep rolling the thing along, it's actually taken on a momentum of its own, and people are just taking the initiative and doing things for themselves. They're doing their own meetups, they're doing their own talks, they're doing their own little mini get-togethers on a particular topic. That's the point at which I think you start to see the real change happening, and it's quite a nice place to be. It takes a little while, but it's a nice place to be.
Product teams are expensive and government doesn't have the commercial drivers. How did you balance cost versus value to users?
So, well, in the context, it was comparatively easy to demonstrate the value of a team that was able to deliver something in between 9 and 18 months over the cost of something that had been outsourced to one of the big IT providers that wouldn't get near users in a live environment for at least 3 to 4 years and would cost, 10 times even more the cost of doing it in-house. So it was kind of, bearing in mind that GDS, Government Digital Service, was set up primarily with cost control authority. So really it was a way of stopping things being done in a very, very expensive and actually not very effective way. And, all of the other stuff that came after that was kind of almost a happy coincidence. But really, it's not that difficult to come in cheaper than the big IT providers of this world with something that actually works. If you're taking the approach where from the very outset, you're testing ideas out with the people who you expect to be using this and continually checking if you're on the right track. If the first time you're checking whether or not the service or the product you've built is right is like 3 or 4 years down the line, how on earth are you supposed to build something that works? So you don't necessarily save money from the cost of the teams working over a period of 9 to 18 months, because as the person asking the question said, they cost money too. But where you do save the money is effectively not having to take that 9, 18, 2 years worth of work and throw it away because it doesn't do anything of any use to anyone. That's the fundamental difference. You're still paying the same amount of money, you're just not chucking it all away after 2 years.
How do product and project management disciplines effectively work together? Don't you just love this already? Particularly when, like a Venn diagram, there are often overlapping responsibilities.
So if, for example, you've got someone who, and I should point out, I did a very basic qualification in Prince 2 a while back because I wanted to understand what I was dealing with myself. And it is perfectly possible to get a good result when, and deliver really great products in a nice, effective way when you're working with a project manager, providing you're all on the same page and you're all thinking in the same way. If project management is seen as essentially a set of controls to be placed upon the team because essentially the team isn't trusted to do things by itself and doesn't have any autonomy to take its own decisions, then the issue isn't the fact that you're using project managers or project management methodologies. The issue is that the team isn't trusted to do the thing. And so that's why it doesn't work. If, however, you've got a project manager who understands and empowers the team and effectively helps them to be as efficient as possible, then it can work very well. Within Prince 2, there's a concept of tailoring, I believe, which allows essentially the process to be altered as needed to suit the needs of the team and to help them work in as efficient a way as possible. And so what that basically means is, rather than just throwing the process book at every project and making every project just tied up in red tape, you can take the more enlightened approach of saying, what does the team actually need to do their job? And what's the minimal amount of process that we need to allow them to do that? And if that's coupled with, we're going to trust and empower the teams to take their own decisions, then suddenly all of the associated problems that come with a very rigorous or a very detailed or a very paper-heavy process sort of melt away. And in actual fact, when you look at what they call delivery managers in government. They call them delivery managers because they're not necessarily doing Scrum, not necessarily doing Agile, they're not necessarily doing Waterfall. They are just the people who are there to help the team do the thing. Their mindset is very much one of collaboration, of coaching the team to be more effective, of clearing away obstacles, to almost be like a servant leader to the team, rather than the person imposing the controls and force them to do a document and do all this laborious stuff that actually detracts from the time they've got to build the thing. Now, if you've got a delivery manager or somebody, a project manager who's working that kind of delivery manager way, you've got no problem. It's not an issue, and things can coexist happily. Where I always saw the problem was where you had a power base in a program team or a project management office team that resisted the change and essentially reasserted their power within the organization by forcing a particular process to be used, even if it wasn't the right thing to be doing. That's, I think, where, part of the thing we were fighting against to an extent, which was, blindly following a process, even if it's not the right process to follow. So, as I said, it depends, because you can have perfectly good project managers who can work in a really, really supportive way, in the same way as you can have product managers who can have a really closed-minded way and blindly follow a methodology, even if that iterates you into a brick wall at the end of the process.
As well as things like cost per transaction, did you try to measure any software measures of effectiveness?
Those four kind of KPIs were the ones that where it made sense to do so. So for the public-facing transactional services and so on, those were like the four ones you absolutely had to measure. Absolutely, if you need to measure other stuff as well, there's nothing stopping you. And in fact, the performance dashboards could put up whatever metrics you wanted to, frankly. And clearly, on the operational side, you'll be monitoring stuff like, is the service up and running? Do we need to be thinking about increasing the amount of storage or the amount of CPU available to the service? All the operational stuff as well. So yeah, absolutely, teams would, set their metrics based on, first of all, what was important as a success metric for the service from a user perspective. But also what made most sense for them to be keeping an eye on. So for example, if you can imagine kind of the spike in traffic that the register to vote service got when just before an election, the people monitoring that service would make sure that absolutely the operational stuff was there, and they were making sure the thing was responding quickly, and there was enough capacity in the service to actually meet the demand that was coming along. So absolutely, it wasn't that we only ever measured those four metrics. They were the bare minimum you had to measure, and then you measure whatever else as you would do in any other product management scenario.